Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be into three,
Ready?
two, one. That's perfect. Spot on.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Well, we're finally doing it, eh?
Yeah.
We've been brewing this idea for the last 15, 18 months, I think.
Yeah, it's a podcast. It's a podcast about architecture, and with the help of AI, we're gonna name this podcast "Drawing the Line." And I think it's a great name. I don't know how AI is doing it, but I think it's given the perfect balance between a seriousness, but at the same time, very sort of chilled, relaxed.
Absolutely.
Which completely relates to what this podcast is going to be about.
Do you want to tell us what drawing the line, what the concept behind it is?
Well, I think drawing the line. I mean, we're drawing lines every single day, right? Essentially, everything that we create as architects is drawing the line. So this podcast is going to be everything related, in terms of architecture. We're both. Well, I'm an architect, practicing 5 years, and you're on your path exactly towards becoming an architecture. So there's a lot to talk about, and I think what we want to do is bring that experiences forward. And I think the key message is actually sharing those experiences, whilst at the same time helping people
absolutely
to get a glimpse of what architecture is about in a construction industry, for people who wants to study architecture. Whether if you're part one or if you're 18, and then if you're already into your studies, and then giving you an idea of what the office life is about, and when you actually start practicing architecture, what sort of knowledge would you bring on board to the architecture itself? So that's one branch.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're sharing our experiences from different parts of our careers, but then also the point is to help the next generation, but also maybe to help people that are already in the industry.
Yeah.
That maybe trying to navigate their way through maybe their architectural assistants or their recently qualified architects. What are the opportunities that are out there for them? Yeah. Because it's not just about working in architecture. The built environment as a whole is such a broad spectrum. There's so many other opportunities elsewhere. But then beyond, sort of looking at sharing our experiences and helping others, we can also talk about iconic buildings and projects. We'll start off in Birmingham. We've got quite a few amazing buildings, I think, in Birmingham.
Exactly. There's so many new high rises coming up. Yeah. There's a whole new master plan at Paradise, which it sets a scene, it sets a standard for how cities should be created, and we can invite architects behind these really sort of new cool master plans, and then talk about how they've actually come up with the idea. But I think in terms of authenticity, what makes our podcast different to the other people? There are other podcasts out there about architecture. Some talk about the education. Some people make it very commercial, and then talks about the whole development and more of from a city, town, or planning point of view. I think with our podcasts, we're still sort of navigating ourselves into a particular theme. Yep. I think over time that will come, but it's also for us. Every day we need to learn how to articulate a story. Yep. And I think our main goal is to actually help people and to get everyone excited for architecture. What's the point of us even existing?
Yeah, and to add to that, don't expect this podcast to be a polished version, because like we said, we're learning ourselves. I mean, for me, it's more about improving our articulation skills, our architectural literacy, how I can present when I'm at university, how we can do design crits in the practice, how we can talk to directors or clients or contractors, just helping us to articulate ourselves in a better manner. Looking back at it, maybe the ums and ahs and the constant hesitation or the constant thought process, how do we overcome those challenges, and improving our own selves first, and then hopefully we can help other people in that regards.
Yeah, and it's topics that are relatable. So over time, I think we're going to ask, as our channel grew, essentially it's all about compound interest. For those of you who invest out there, and listen to other podcasts, we're going to try to keep posting this, and we're going to start finding our ways to navigate. How we're going to do this podcast, and it's going to be a slow process, and we know that. But I think what we're trying to do is show the dedication and the passion that we have in architecture, but not just from a drawing board, from a computer screen, but at the same time from a discussion.
Yep.
And there's so many things to talk about in architecture, and I hope, there are topics that's really going to excite people, and that's really going to help people in terms of gauging an insight in the construction industry and why are things done the way they are, to articulate. And then there will be life skills, like me and you we're both in the industry. I'm 30 something, you're 20 something, and then we've all gone up and down and trying to make it work. Overall, is it all really worth it?
It's perfect. That leads us perfectly onto is architecture worth it?
Yeah, I think
in this episode we'll just discuss a few points that we've experienced maybe, and that we've seen our seniors and maybe even juniors that have recently got into the industry, and just bring it all to light. We'll talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, not just the good, great, and the best, because we have to be authentic to ourselves and to our listeners, hopefully.
Absolutely. I think being authentic and being unfiltered, it's really important. And I think we need to have fun with it. It's a chat, and I think we should be able to not know what our target group is at the moment, not know whether or not if you're focusing on
because it's not a business, right?
It's not a business.
It's a chat.
We're just doing it
we're doing it for ourselves, but also along the way we're hoping to bring value to other people.
Yeah.
Whether that's students, like we said earlier on, or people within the industry already.
Yeah.
So I think let's just face it right now. Is architecture worth it? It's not a yes or no answer. Let's just discuss the challenges of the industry.
Exactly.
Of the education process.
With all of that being said, is architecture worth it?
What was your journey into architecture like? So
I think in terms of journey, we're definitely going to go through the whole education topic, right? We're going to have to go through, for those who wants to start doing architecture, how long it takes.
Yeah.
I became qualified 5 years ago, so I'm a qualified architect. I've been practicing in Birmingham for the past 5 years. I've been in the industry for over 10, and I've seen small, medium, and large practices. I've been, practices that are really small, and then there's only just 4 of us, and each one of us will handle 6, 7 projects at the same time. Yeah, and it's like a baptism by fire. And you get to medium-sized practices where they do, slightly bigger scale projects, but then at the same time, you're constantly be challenged by fee. So there's only just 1-2 people on a major multi-million project, and then that's across the industry.
So, in terms of your journey then into architecture, because you said you qualified 5 years ago, so how long was that from the start when you started university as an undergrad as a Part 1 student until Part 3?
So
because I know obviously many people, when we talk to family or friends who aren't in architecture, they'll say, "Oh, isn't architecture like a really long course? It doesn't take 7 years or 10 years." Quite frankly, it does.
Yeah, it does. It's a really long course. Yeah. 7 years, I think, if you're lucky, right? 7 years if you're lucky. So for everyone that's listening to the podcast, to give you a breakdown, architecture at absolute minimum will take 7 years. And that
I actually don't know anyone that's done it in 7 years, by the way.
I know there are some people in
theoretically it can take you 7 years, but that's like streamlined.
Yeah, that's minimum. Yeah. I know people that have gone straight into, but that is, everything is smooth sailing, and then you got everything covered from day one. So with architecture, there's Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Part 1 is your bachelor equivalent, and that's normally 3 years. Yep. So you go into uni like any other student, you do your bachelor, and that's your 3 years done. And then you gain a qualification, and you call yourself Part 1. A lot of people actually even stop right there at Part 1.
They do. Interestingly, when I was a student as a Part 1 student, in first year we had, I believe, around 80 students.
Yeah.
And then by the time we graduated, 3 years later, I think we were down to 36.
Yeah, the stats don't lie, man.
Yeah, that's just throughout the Part 1 study phase.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm not sure what the figures are. I had reached out to university and the RIBA to figure out maybe if we can get some sort of census or data to figure out how many people then actually went on to work.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, because not every student does the survey post-qualification, so it's hard to get that data. But I'm sure it's not a huge number. I wouldn't be surprised if it is a single digit from the 36 that graduated, or 40 of us that graduated. Maybe only a handful might have carried on within the industry.
And I think, so after your part one, right, you've done your 3 years, and then you're like, okay, I've got the knowledge of how to design a building, but you really don't.
That's what we think.
Right? You really don't. You've done this incredible project, you got straight A's, or whatever, first class, you're like, I'm ready to tackle the world. And traditionally, what you have to do is after your part one or your bachelor degree, you take a year out and you go into the office and experience what, you experience what it is to work in an architectural practice, which nobody teaches you.
And it's nothing like what we prepared at university.
It's nothing what you prepared. I mean, imagine Bartlett, Bartlett, for those who don't know, is one of the most prestigious architecture schools in the UK, right? And they do absolutely incredible work. And I think if you did your part one in Bartlett, you're 90%, going to get a job when you come out.
At one of the top firms.
Yeah, at one of the top
design orientated.
But then what they realize is when you graduate from such a, from the top of the class, you get your straight A's, and you come to, you come to one of the, best offices in London or whatever. And then the part one tasks actually can be really daunting. It varies. It does vary. You could go into a practice and you're really lucky and you're really enthusiastic, passionate, and then you may be starting to get trusted with some more responsibilities. But in reality, you still don't know anything.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, when you finished your part one, did you go into practice or did you carry on?
So my story is pretty bad. When I did my part one, I was a great student. I had a very strong art background, so I was able to paint. My brain works in 3D, right? There's like a test that you can do, see what kind of person you are. Okay. Some people are very sensitive to numbers. Some people, and then they're good at a certain job. Some people are very good at articulating, and then they're good at languages. Yep. So they're a certain job. I was designed for architecture. I had a great mathematical background. I was throughout A level and GCSE, great math. Had a great logical brain, and at the same time, I was able to paint and create really well. Right, so I was perfect for the architect.
So perfect ingredients for architecture.
Yeah, for architecture. Even my tutor back in secondary school, looking at my GCSE and A level, they just said choose architecture. You won't regret it.
Do you blame them?
Why do I regret it? No, I'm joking. So I went into uni, which I went to De Montfort University, and it's also called Leicester School of Architecture. And within that uni, they do an interview. Obviously, the first 2 years, I absolutely loved it. Okay. You make models, and I was very hands-on, and I loved designing, making really pretty pictures, and drawings that could illustrate my design ideas. But unfortunately, in the final year, the third year, the most important year, I slacked. Bottom line is I met some really sort of unenthusiastic people. Met a group of people that came from overseas and became friends. And then, for them, it was more like having fun, where I was not focusing on my studies. So I actually just scraped by my part one study. So I didn't get, I imagine I would get, everyone predicted in my second year that I would get a first class for sure. Everyone was like, Daz is going to do well, but I really slacked. And then at the end, I think I barely scraped by. And that is purely because I was doing so well in my second year. So after that, I couldn't get a job. Yeah. I couldn't.
Was that because of your portfolio or because of maybe your ability to apply and the way to apply maybe?
Yeah, so my project was for the third year. So everyone, again, when you do your part one, when you get into uni, you have to do this final project which showcase your ability, of how you could design and then what sort of drawings you could produce. And this portfolio is your key to get into a really good firm, but my portfolio was terrible because I didn't have that good project. Nothing came through. I did something very similar that was in the second year, and the building sucked. And I applied a lot of places and I couldn't get it. So what I had to do in the end for my year out was I had to go abroad. So I went to China, and through connections, my dad set me up in a company from his friend. And then I did my, experiences there. And then, it was unpaid, it was long hours. And then I didn't learn anything that was UK related, building reg related, planning related. The drawing was, churn out within 24 hours, Was
that over the summer period?
That was, so I left the UK in December-ish. Okay. And then I did about 6 months, I would say. And then I wanted to come back straight away and then do my part two. Yeah. So what's part two then? Because you're a part two, right?
I'm a part. Yeah, I mean, part two. Yes, I'm doing it as an apprentice, a level 7 apprenticeship, which covers both part 2 and part 3, but I haven't quite completed either of them yet.
No, but this is a different route. So before you dive into that, which is again something that we will cover. Traditionally, what is a part 2?
So traditionally, part 2 is an extension to part 1. So part 2 is a 2-year program, which is Masters in Architecture. So if you do it full-time, it's 2 years. Part-time is 3 years. As simple as that. But it's an extension to an undergrad. So it's very similar, but takes it up a notch a little bit, I suppose, because at that point, you're expected to have maybe experience 1 year out in the industry. So you'll have a bit more competency, I suppose, and a bit more exposure, and you might understand regulations better, you might understand materials better, and the way how buildings are designed and built. So you apply that knowledge now in part 2. So the projects that you create are part 2. I would say should be, in my experience anyways, they're a bit more realistic, let's call it.
Yeah.
You're still pushing the boundaries of design.
Yeah.
Of course, you're not working to a constraint of maybe fees or finances or the cost evaluation of it. So you're still pushing boundaries, but it's a bit more realistic because you understand parameters, you understand regulations better, you understand approved documents better. So you apply all of that, hopefully. So
in a perfect world, once you've done your bachelor and then you've gone into the office, you spend a year in the office, learn from the best, learn everything that you need to know. Well, not everything, but
really. Yeah, you're still learning.
You have the knowledge about planning. You have the knowledge about how buildings work in a real world, and how wide the stairs are supposed to be, how big the corridors are. What double space feels like. I mean, and then after you gain a bit of flavor of that, then you go into your masters, right? You go into masters and you do another project, and this is a masters for 2 years.
Yep.
Right. So that's already 3 + 1 + 2. That's 6 years, already into altogether into architecture career, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's just at the master's level, and then once you finish your masters, you go back out into the industry again. And I believe, do you need 12 months of PEDRs? We haven't actually spoken about PEDRs. So during the first placement, following part 1 qualification, you have to record your experience.
It's such a convoluted
experience
process.
And development records.
Yeah.
Every 3 months, and that goes towards your part 3 exam.
And so again, to make this relatable, and then PEDR, we're using acronyms that only people in architecture that will understand. It's essentially a record of your experience. So if you were in an office after your bachelor, which is your part 1, you have a 12-month. In a perfect world, you will have 12-month experience in architectural practice, and you record those experiences and you register them, and that register is called PEDR, right?
Professional experience. Development records, something along those lines. It's in increments of 3 months.
Yeah.
So like you said, in a perfect world, if you do a 12-month placement, you should come out with 4 PDRs that are already recorded, signed, and approved by your academic advisor. And
in a perfect world.
In a perfect world.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I am still doing my PDRs from my first placement.
If I was to be completely honest with you, I did all of my PDRs within 2 weekends before I submitted my part 3. which we'll go into part 3. So okay, so we got part 1. As a bachelor, that's 3 years. After you come out of that, you go into the office for 1 year, and then or 12 months, let's say, and you gain experience. You get a flavor of architecture industry. You record your experience, and you apply again to potentially a different school. If you want to change place a little bit, which I think is actually not bad. Not a bad idea.
I think after you've completed your part 1, you have a bit more of an understanding of architecture school.
That's the idea.
Yeah, that's the idea. And then at that point, hopefully, you might have seen bits on social media, whether it's through magazines or through the RIBA, and I quite like Bartlett School of Architecture, for example. I like the work that they're producing, or I like Manchester School of Architecture.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to aspire to be someone who creates work like them. So you'll apply to those institutions. Sometimes you might just go for the convenient option, whatever's close by. But then as a part 2 student, you've still got quite a few avenues you can go down. There's full-time, obviously, for 2 years straight. Part-time, which is 3 years. But in part-time, you're working for 4 days a week. And then you've got this collaborative practice route, which is, I think, it's fairly recent, I believe, where you do the first year as a full-time student, and then the second year as a part-time student. And then the fourth option is apprenticeship, level 7 degree apprenticeship, which is sponsored by your employer, but also supported by the government. We'll go a bit more into what an apprenticeship is at maybe a later episode. But those are your 4 avenues, I suppose, that you can go down for your part 2. And then once you've then completed part 2, then comes part 3. So by that time, if you add up the years again now, so you've got 3 years for undergrad, then you've got 1 year for part 1 placement. That's already 4 years. Then let's say you do the traditional route, so 2 more years, 6 years. And then you've got to work for minimum 12 to 18 months, I suppose, until you can sit your part 3 exam. You have to have 24 months worth of PEDR records.
I think what you should do is lay that part 3 out a little bit more clear. So part 1 and part 2, you're actually in uni. Okay, traditionally, you are actually in uni full time, right? You're paying your accommodation. You're getting support from some sort of student loan or family or whatever. That's your part 1 and part 2. Those are full time courses. And then after that, when you apply for your part 3, it is not a full time course.
So you're not in
uni
physically.
You can only do your part 3 if you are practicing at the same time. So in a perfect world, when you come out of part 2, you get a job and you start your job. That's when you can apply for part 3.
Okay.
I think the key is that you sit your part 3 whilst you're in an office.
In office.
And,
I think the biggest challenge or hurdle rather for many people is getting a case study.
Yeah.
So if you're working in a domestic size office where there's only 4, 5, 6 people, it's difficult to get a case study on board because many of those clients won't go down a contractual route. For example, when you're extending a house, what are the cost implications of going down a contractual route?
Yeah. And then this is, I think, again, to explain it, so part 3 is mainly, it's got nothing to do with design anymore. No. Part 3 is actually all about your knowledge in terms of how to run a practice, if you ever do run a practice.
Management.
How to manage it, how to protect yourself from getting sued. And then, why do you want to become an architect? So, it begs the question, after all of this, is it still worth it?
Let's say it's 8 years now, 8 years down the line, 9 years down the line. Yeah, is it worth it? Because you've studied for 8 or 9 years, you've practiced maybe for 2 or 3 years in between. And then what are the salary expectations?
Yeah, that's a different...
It's almost like a taboo question, right? In architecture. I mean, we have the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, who I think submit every year the salary guide, but it's for the year before.
Yeah. I mean, when I first started,
let's talk about salaries.
when I first started as a part 1, I gained nothing. But as a part 1, at my time, it was £18,000 in London, and that was a while back. Yeah, that was quite a while back.
What, 2013, 2014?
Yeah, 2013. Yeah, that's £18,000
I'm still
per
sitting
year.
for my GCSEs then.
Yeah, that's. But then in hindsight, my education fee was only £3,500.
Absolutely, exactly.
So
I mean, now it's 9.25, I think, per year.
Yeah.
I mean, to put that into perspective now, I think the RIBA benchmark for general across the UK for part one, fresh out of university, is about £23,000 maybe.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah, which is
actually 22, 23.
That's I think, equivalent to the living wage foundation.
Yeah.
So it's still a minimum wage essentially. So you're not getting a huge amount. If you compare that to other industries, I don't know, for instance, let's say you get an admin job with the HMRC or the civil service, you'll probably earn quite a bit more than what a part one architectural assistant would. So for those who are listening, I mean, imagine you did 3 years in architecture and you think, oh, I'm going to come out and I'm going to design a beautiful building and I'm going to get paid shitloads for doing so. You're not quite there. I mean, after 3 years, you're going to come out getting paid £18,000 a year, and then you can barely live on that wage. £22,000 now. Oh, okay. Changed.
£22,000, right? You can barely live on that. So you probably end up either living from home, which I know a lot of people do throughout the part one, so they can save a bit of money, or you're going to be not in London. You're going to be somewhere in like
living
Birmingham.
Paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, exactly. And you're going to have to figure out how you do rent. You're going to have to, but it's okay. You're young.
And you know what, to put it into a bit more perspective, at school, at university, we're not taught about all these other costs that we'll have to absorb, because when we're growing up, in most scenarios, our parents are looking after us. Once you get out there, let's say you're now a part one assistant, you're living out. So yes, you've got rent, then you've got council tax, then you've got your bills, and you've got
there's a lot of costs,
internet and mobile phone and TV licenses and your Netflix subscription and your gym subscription that you never use.
If you're a part
all these
one,
things add up.
If you're a part one and you're living in a box, you should not be looking at Netflix subscriptions. You should be thinking about putting that money in some sort of saving pot for an emergency fund. just bunk it off from someone else, from your ex, from your girlfriend, from your boyfriend. I don't know what, but
and to add to that once again is, at university you're thinking, oh yes, I've designed this incredible final project. My portfolio looks amazing. I'm going to go into practice and do the same thing. You'll probably be doing window schedules, door schedules.
Oh, well, if you're lucky, actually. Yeah, it depends on the type of practice, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Again, this is, I think, something that we can dive into in one of the further later episodes, what to expect as a part one when you're in the office. And then we can give you 3 different scenarios from a small office, from a medium-sized office, and from a large office. And, it might
talk about the pros and cons of each.
Exactly. And it might help people to actually give them an idea of what size office they want to go for. And then everyone has different experiences, everyone has different personalities, and it's all about, I think, your attitude and the passion that you have for the job. Yeah.
So now we've covered the education journey, how long it takes. We've covered briefly the financial side of architecture in terms of the financial strain.
I mean, we're partially covered that. So okay, guys, as a part one, when you come out, you're looking around 22K. That's your benchmark, right? As a part two, you're looking at, I don't know, what's a part two? I think
the going rate is 30, 31 maybe.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was earning 26 when I was...
But you see, so now that's a debate which I hear quite a lot, where my superiors will say, oh, when I was a part one or when I was a part two, I was earning 16,000.
Yeah,
but times have changed, don't forget. These guys are 10 years ahead of me in terms of experience, right? Yeah, inflation. I mean, just in the last 3 years, look at the rate of inflation. It's ridiculous, right? Yeah. Minimum wage has gone up. Living wage has increased significantly. To put it into perspective, when I graduated as part one, I was earning, I think, 19.5 maybe. And that was the living wage foundation, by the way. So it was the bare minimum. Yeah, it's increased since. So just in 3 years, the minimum, I suppose, the income for part one's gone from 19.5 to 23, let's say 22. So it's increased a fair chunk.
Well, £3,000. I'm going to give you a little math. Yeah. £3,000 per annum increase is about £150 per month. So every grand you increase in your salary equates roughly about £50 a month. So looking at the inflation data, that £150 is nothing.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a huge amount of money now to those who are older than us within the industry, right? Like, oh yeah, it's gone up by £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 since when I was a part one. But the rate of inflation has doubled or tripled that maybe. Yeah. So it doesn't quite level out. So we're not going to answer the question, is architecture worth it? But just to put into perspective, maybe it was a bit more rewarding, maybe 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago. now, not so much, particularly because there's so many other avenues and opportunities out there for people.
Yeah.
If you're a creative individual, you can use your creativity in a different industry, for example. Or you can still work in the built environment, just not in architecture necessarily. You can go down photography, you can go down design, you can go down content creation.
Yeah.
So I've diversified myself
Yeah.
with those, but architecture is still my focus because I enjoy it so much. I enjoy the long hours, I enjoy the long education journey, I enjoy the pressures, the challenges.
You're nuts. You know, with all of that pressure, you could go into finances and earn that maybe like 10 times.
Exactly.
No, but that's the thing, though. I think is to understand where the passion is. And
Absolutely.
I think the bottom line is, if you want to do architecture, you need to love it. Yeah. You really do need to love it. Yeah. So that brings on to, the further, the extension of this topic, whether or not if architecture is still worth it. From an education point of view, it's
long.
Yeah, it's long.
And
I personally don't think the time that you've given in education-wise is equal to the reward that you're getting.
In. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's way too long. I think the architecture of education of architecture needs a shake-up. They either reduce the amount of years to do architecture, or they bring some sort of apprentice route, which they are trying to do at the moment.
Well, that's the frustrating part. So the level 7 degree apprenticeship came about. Okay.
What's a level 7 apprenticeship?
So level 7 is essentially your master's level.
Okay.
So I think it's a 4th year or 5th year at university. So how an apprenticeship works is an employer whose wage bill, I believe, is greater than £3 million a year, contributes a certain percentage of their revenue or the wage bill, I think, towards an apprenticeship levy, which is a government grant or government fund. So in an apprenticeship now, so my clause is that I'm employed by my employer. They are in a contract with me and the university and the government. So I go study. It's all paid for by the levy, the fund that they contribute towards by the government.
Right. So what, the office doesn't pay you?
I get paid full time, yes.
Yeah, but
I get paid
does
full-time.
the office pay for your education?
So typically, in a normal apprenticeship, no, the office doesn't need to contribute towards anything.
Oh, right.
Because they're already contributing on annual basis towards an apprenticeship levy, which gets utilized for all apprenticeships, not just for architecture. It's a government fund. So government utilizes it across all different apprenticeships. But in my current scenario with University of Cambridge, there is an additional fee, which my employer does pay towards. But typically in an apprenticeship, no, an employer doesn't need to. But it's not as hard, yes and no, it's not as direct as that. There are other clauses depending on the size of the practice. But typically, yeah, a large employer does not need to contribute towards education.
I mean, I think the apprenticeship group is becoming more and more popular, and I can understand why. Because whilst you're studying, you're earning money. You don't have a 2-year where you just basically burning money.
Living off student finance.
Living off student finance, which gives you a bigger debt. At the moment, I'm still paying off my debt. And then I'm like 10 years working in already.
And speaking of debt, by the way, I don't think many students realize, I certainly didn't, when I signed the student finance contract back when I was 18 years old, it's compounding interest.
Yeah.
So when I graduated, I believe, with a debt of 37 or 39,000 pounds. And I checked last summer, it's sitting at 46,000. And I've been contributing towards it, by the way.
So for those people who doesn't have that sort of financial, sensitivity, I guess, compounding interest is, well, imagine if you have £10 and then you're paying back, let's say 1% or something, right, every year. But then the interests, for example, is adjustable as per the government every year. So 1 year you could be on 2%, but another year you could be on 4%.
Yeah.
Another year, so 4%, you're going to end up actually having to pay more
overall grand scheme of things.
Yeah. So you end up,
It just compounds month on month on month. I think during the height of it, I think it was at 7.9 or 8.9% interest.
Yeah. Yeah. It really doesn't go down. No. So I've been paying this thing for...
And bear in mind, you're on the £3,000
exactly
finance, whereas I'm on 9.25.
And this is why people are doing an apprenticeship more. I think for some other practices, they actually pay for students.
To do, I think, part-time maybe?
Yeah, exactly. So they actually pay for their university fees, I think.
Yeah. So I mean,
or contribute
towards it.
Towards it.
So if you now weigh up the pros and cons of apprenticeship, right? So yes, you've got the financial benefit, but then I think the biggest benefit of it all is you're working whilst you're studying at the same time.
Yeah.
So you're exposed to the industry.
Yeah.
You're polishing your skills. You're learning new skills. You've got an ample amount of exposure to projects, to incredible individuals within the office itself.
Which is kind of similar to how it was traditionally done, because I think architecture traditionally, I think before university all started, you do it through pupillage, you do it through apprenticeship.
Yeah.
You follow a master, and and you're at the beginning you're an apprentice, and he's going to teach you whilst you're doing stuff, whilst you're learning the trade, and he's going to teach you how to do it. I think in some way that's quite good, but like you said, you do get a financial benefit from that. You do alleviate some of that pressure financially, but at the same time, it takes you how many times as long? Like twice as long?
No, I disagree. So traditional masters is 2 years, and apprenticeship masters is 3 years.
Okay, so 1 year extra.
It's 1 year extra.
But then whilst you still work, yeah.
So it's not a massive amount of time added on.
Yeah.
It's a long course regardless. You're adding another year on, another year and a half on top. But like you said, you're alleviating any financial stress.
Yeah.
You're gaining live experience within the industry.
Yeah.
What more can you ask for? But the annoying part now is I'm not sure if the decision has been made by the government, but there were talks late part of last year that the government might pull funding for level 7 apprenticeships across the board, not just for architecture, across the board. That includes law, accounting, and finance, as well as architecture.
Yeah.
So we're not sure what the verdict is. I know the RIBA president was in the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago, presenting a case, why we should carry on apprenticeships. Yeah.
So I think circling back to the theme of the discussion today, after all of this, would you, how much passion do you actually have to be still, be enthusiastic about architecture? And I think today you look at, when you look at the office, your office and my office, and I see a lot of part 1s and part 2s, and part 2s especially, particularly when they're looking at apprenticeship, there's still a lot of people doing it, because I think in the world of risk versus reward, architecture as a profession, it's still very, very rewarding.
I'd still challenge you on that opinion, because in terms of risk is your time, your effort, your money, your time lost, by the way, not just throughout the education process, but also the long hours of our industry, the stresses of our industry. So I do believe I think it's high risk and low reward to begin with, compared to other industries in terms of the reward. Maybe because I'm still quite a junior.
Yeah.
I'm thinking more about the financial side of things and the time value. And
it's probably why the culture nowadays in an architecture industry, we do see a change.
Yeah.
When I was doing my part 1 and part 2, staying late, that was a norm. That is really a norm. I'll be lucky if I didn't, especially during my year out in London, I was lucky if I didn't stay until like 8 p.m. every single day on a daily basis.
And don't get me wrong, I end up doing lots of hours too.
Yeah.
But going back to it all, in terms of is it worth it? And you mentioned a good point about passion for the industry. Now, passion is subjective. I generally enjoy working in architecture. Yeah, fine, the financial reward isn't great. Yes, it takes up a lot of my time, whether it's with family, time that could be spent with family or with friends, but I still enjoy it. But you are right, there is a massive shift now in Guard in terms of the current generation of part 1s and part 2s out in the industry. I don't think they're too keen on staying behind.
I think it all comes down to attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think in architecture it's down to how much you put in is how much you'll get out?
I think you see that, definitely. The more hours you put in, it's a bit of an outdated sort of mindset, isn't it? The more hour you put in, and it is about working smart. It is about prioritizing, but you need to go through a certain process to actually understand what to prioritize and then how to do things efficiently. There are brilliant part 1s and part 2s that I've worked with, that they just sort of get it.
Yep.
And then they, obviously they do make certain mistakes, and, you guide them through that process. But you also sort of bringing up someone, and then they, you teach them how to prioritize, and you teach them how to be efficient. And it's about, sometimes it is about getting the job done. And if we're all staying late, and I think working with a group to achieve something, a competition, winning a competition or something, and then coming out of it, even, you had a few late nights, but then you are rewarded.
Rewarding. Yeah, it feels rewarding. You're right, absolutely. So would you, shall we just quickly now summarize in if you want to answer it, you can. Is architecture worth it for you?
Yeah.
Has it been rewarding? Have you found it that it was worth it?
I think for the first key point, right?
Yeah.
I think obviously we will talk about other aspects as well. I believe, for me, from an education point of view, after spending 7 or 8 years, whilst, from the time consumption point of view and the reward that you get it's really hard to say. I would think every industry is different. From my own experience, it was worth it for me. But if you were to look at nowadays, the technology, the AI, everything, you could very well go into a computer, you do computer science for 3 years and you come out earning much better salaries.
Higher, of course.
So I think from that point of view, you really need to think about whether or not you're passionate about architecture. And if you're not passionate about architecture, you're doing it for money, and if you're doing it for, I don't know what you're doing it for, but if you're not doing it for the sake of that passion, you should not do it. It's definitely not worth it.
Yeah, I think I'll echo exactly what you're saying. For me, I tell this to my family members quite a lot, which is there's not been a single day in the last 3-4 years where I've dreaded going into the office. I've genuinely enjoyed going in every day because you're surrounded by really nice people. Certainly, in my experience, you're surrounded by some really nice individuals. Yeah, the projects can be challenging.
There's always office politics. There's always, with every industry you're in.
Yeah, there is. But I think I've been fortunate. I've been blessed to be surrounded by individuals who are all quite supportive. I've learned a lot in the last 2-3 years. I'm able to now sort of push myself a little further. And it is down to passion, I think. If you put the finances aside to begin with, at an early point in your career, if you genuinely enjoy the subject, and architecture isn't just about buildings, by the way, for those that are listening that are at the beginning of their journey, there's so many other disciplines within architecture, or so many different areas: fire safety, building regs, accessibility, inclusion.
Oh yeah, there's a whole minefield.
We can go into it. So once you find your niche, or you find the passion, you find the drive, you find what pushes you and gets you going, I think it's absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
Put the finances aside to begin with, I think it's worth it if you're interested in architecture as a broader subject.
So yeah, exactly. I think you're absolutely right. If you're passionate about architecture, and if you are not to do it solely for money, for your salary, because all of that will come when you become successful as an architect. Whether if you slowly start off your own firm. I've known a lot of colleagues, a lot of part ones and part twos. They started just focus on domestic route, doing private extensions, and then they bring in 6 figures a year at the age of 30. And you can absolutely do that, and then you can start bringing a name up for yourself. So I think that the conclusion is, if I may, or even not a conclusion, our point of view, our experience is, if you're passionate about architecture, and if you love buildings, because it's a massive jigsaw puzzle. It's not just about art and making things pretty. And if you love solving problems, if you love working with clients, if you love working with subcontractors, if you love exposing yourself to all these different aspects of life, yes, architecture is worth it, because it's 100%. Not, at the end of the day, it's not just about designing a building. Yeah. Designing a building is probably 10% of your time, I think. Most of the time, you're liaising, you're coordinating, you're solving a problem.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you're talking, you're articulating like what we're doing right now. You're trying to sell your story, you're trying to sell your idea.
Your vision of that space.
Absolutely. The last time you actually designed something is probably aligning a window from the top one to the bottom one. thinking of a brick color.
Brick dims.
Yeah, when you actually design a space, that's at early stage, and that's
probably what 5% of the entire journey.
10% of the entire journey, absolutely. And that is dependent on which architectural firm you go into. You could go into a firm that's absolutely don't care about design at all, and then you could
delivery.
you could just be doing boring boxes. So that's where your passion sort of dies. So yeah, like you said.
I think that probably closes the initial first episode nicely, and I think going forward, hopefully we'll touch up on some of those points that we made mention of.
Yeah.
In maybe a bit more depth. Maybe we'll bring some people on to discuss some of those topics.
I would love to say, for example, when we have an episode that talks about an iconic building, and then is someone who's maybe a partner of a certain firm. I would love to get their point of view, and then gauge their insights on the architecture industry today. Do they think it's worth it? And especially giving the young professionals these days a little bit of a tip and a hint on what they should focus on, and if they want to become an architect. And I think in the further episodes, in the future episodes, we would definitely need to touch base on from a whole overall construction industry point of view.
Yep.
It's very well that you're passionate, you're a great architect, you've gained your qualification, but then the industry is dying or something, that you have absolutely no job. What do you do then? You really have to, like what we're doing right now. We're
diversify slightly.
Yeah, you're doing so well in terms of social media, and we're starting this podcast. You really have to find skill set in different things. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that was great. Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go,
thank you folks
guys.
for listening. That's our first episode of Drawing the Line.
It's done. We did it.
It's 18 months in the making. We finally recorded an episode.
But
I just want to say thank you to Howells for allowing us to use the space.
And CNW.
And CNW for allowing us to use the camera and the mic.
Yeah, and thank you guys. We wouldn't be here without you.
If you have any comments, if you have any topics that you think we should cover, or if you feel as if you have some value that you can add to our podcast or to our listeners, then please do drop us a message.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that we want to share our experience, but we want to help people. So what we're talking about, hopefully give people that want to get into architecture a bit of insight. Yeah. So we will talk about topics that matters to the audience, right? It is about us in some way. Absolutely, we want to. It's not about we're not gonna get famous from doing this, but for us, it's being able to share and being able to improve our storytelling skills, and having our voices heard as young professionals. But I think what we want to focus on absolutely is helping other people. So if you've got a topic that you want us to talk about, if you've got a building that you're really interested in, give us a shout, and then we'll do our research, we'll do our background, and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, we'll give it a go, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, then see you in the next time, guys.
Of Drawing the Line.
Drawing the Line.
Should we do outro as a clap again? 3, 2, 1. That was so bad.
That sucks, man.